My name is Emma Martinez, and I discovered something about my mother-in-law that changed everything. 3 days before my wedding, I found her standing in my bedroom, holding a pair of fabric scissors, surrounded by the shredded remains of my grandmother's vintage lace wedding dress. But what she didn't know was that I had already uncovered her deepest secret, hidden away in a storage unit across town. Sometimes revenge isn't about getting even, it's about revealing the truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my small apartment in Tempe, Arizona, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I was 28 years old, working as a graphic designer for a local marketing firm, and in exactly 72 hours, I was supposed to marry the love of my life, Ryan Thompson. Everything should have been perfect. The venue was booked, the flowers were ordered, and my dress, my beautiful dress that had belonged to my late mother Sophia, was hanging carefully in my bedroom closet, wrapped in protective plastic and surrounded by lavender sachets. I remember that particular morning because it was the first time I truly understood what my mother meant when she used to tell me that some people smile with their mouths while their eyes tell a completely different story. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and going over the final wedding details, when my phone buzzed with a text from Linda Thompson, my soon-to-be mother-in-law. The message was simple enough. Emma, dear, I'd love to stop by this morning to see how you're feeling about everything. Mother-daughter chat before the big day. I'll bring pastries from that little bakery you mentioned. I stared at the screen for a long moment. In the 8 months since Ryan and I had gotten engaged, Linda had never once suggested a mother-daughter chat. She had been polite, certainly, always asking the right questions about the wedding planning and nodding approvingly when I showed her the venue photos or the flower arrangements. But there had always been something carefully measured about her responses, as if she were playing a role rather than genuinely participating in the excitement. Ryan had warned me that his mother could be particular about things. She had very specific ideas about how events should unfold, especially family events. She had been a high school English teacher for 30 years before retiring, and she approached most situations with the same methodical precision she had once used to grade essays. Everything had to be proper, traditional, and executed according to her vision of how things should be done. I texted back that I'd love to see her, though something in my stomach twisted as I sent the message. Maybe it was pre-wedding nerves, or maybe it was the memory of our last conversation, when she had made an offhand comment about how different my family's traditions were from theirs. She had said it with a smile, but there was something underneath that smile that made me feel like I was being evaluated, rather than welcomed. An hour later, Linda arrived carrying a pink bakery box and wearing a cream-colored blazer that looked like it had been pressed that morning. She looked around my apartment with the same expression she might have used to inspect a hotel room, taking note of everything from the mismatched furniture I had collected over the years to the framed photos of my family that covered most of my bookshelf. "This is cozy," she said, setting the pastries on my kitchen counter. "Very bohemian." I wasn't entirely sure if bohemian was meant as a compliment, but I thanked her and started making fresh coffee. She settled into one of my dining chairs and opened the bakery box, revealing an assortment of croissants and Danish pastries arranged with the kind of precision that suggested she had specifically requested they be placed that way. "I wanted to talk to you about the ceremony," she said, selecting a almond croissant and placing it carefully on the small plate I had given her. "There are a few family traditions I think would be lovely to incorporate." I sat down across from her, cradling my coffee mug in both hands. "Of course." "What did you have in mind?" Linda smiled, but again it was that careful, measured smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Well, for one thing, I thought it might be nice if you wore something borrowed from the Thompson family. I have a beautiful pearl necklace that belonged to Ryan's grandmother. It would be perfect with your dress." I nodded politely. The dress she was referring to was my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit me by Mrs. Helen Rodriguez, who owned the best alteration shop in Phoenix. The dress was simple but elegant, made of ivory silk with delicate lace sleeves and a chapel-length train. My mother had worn it when she married my father 30 years ago, and it was one of the few things I had left of her after she passed away from cancer 3 years earlier. That sounds lovely, I said. I'd be honored to wear it. Wonderful. Linda took a small bite of her croissant, chewing thoughtfully. And I was also thinking about the reception. I know you've planned for that little mariachi band, which I'm sure will be fun, but I wondered if we might also include some more traditional music. Maybe some classical pieces during dinner? The mariachi band had been Ryan's idea, actually. He knew how much my Mexican heritage meant to me, and he wanted to make sure the wedding reflected both of our backgrounds. But I could see how Linda might view it as too casual, too different from what she had probably imagined for her son's wedding. We could definitely discuss that with the band, I said carefully. I'm sure they know some classical pieces as well. Linda nodded approvingly and continued eating her pastry. We chatted for another 20 minutes about various wedding details, and with each suggestion she made, I felt a growing sense that this conversation wasn't really about including family traditions. It was about reshaping the wedding to fit her vision of what a proper Thompson family wedding should look like. When she finally left, promising to see me at the rehearsal dinner the following evening, I stood in my doorway watching her walk to her car. She moved with the same careful precision with which she spoke, every step deliberate and controlled. As she drove away, I realized that I felt more anxious about the wedding than I had before she arrived. That afternoon, I met my best friend, Jessica Chen, at our favorite coffee shop near Arizona State University. Jessica had been my college roommate and was now a successful photographer who specialized in weddings and family portraits. She was also the most perceptive person I knew, with an ability to read people and situations that often left me wondering if she had some kind of supernatural insight. "You look like someone just told you that your wedding cake is made of cardboard," she said as I slumped into the chair across from her. I told her about Linda's visit, trying to articulate the feeling I couldn't quite shake. "It's not that anything she said was unreasonable," I explained. "It's just that every suggestion felt like she was trying to erase the parts of the wedding that were actually me." Jessica sipped her iced coffee and studied my face. "Has Ryan noticed any of this?" "I don't think so. Or if he has, he's choosing not to see it. He's always been protective of his mother. His dad died when Ryan was in college, and Linda raised Amanda and him pretty much on her own after that. He feels like he owes her a lot." "That's understandable," Jessica said. "But that doesn't mean she gets to redesign your wedding." I knew Jessica was right, but I also knew that confronting Linda directly would put Ryan in an impossible position. His family meant everything to him, and the last thing I wanted was to start our marriage by creating conflict between him and his mother. "Maybe I'm overreacting," I said. "Maybe she's just trying to help." Jessica gave me a look that suggested she thought I was being naive, but she didn't push the issue. Instead, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Changed the subject to the logistics of the wedding photography, and we spent the rest of the afternoon going over the shot list and timeline for the ceremony. That evening, Ryan came home from work with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine to celebrate our last week as an unmarried couple. He was in an excellent mood, excited about the wedding, and full of stories about his coworkers' reactions to his upcoming time off for our honeymoon. We were planning to spend 10 days in Costa Rica, a trip we had been saving for and planning for over a year. "Mom seemed really happy when I talked to her this afternoon," he said as we sat on my couch sharing pad thai and spring rolls. "She said you two had a nice chat about the wedding." I smiled and nodded, not wanting to dampen his enthusiasm. "She's very thoughtful. She wants everything to be perfect." "She does," Ryan agreed. "Sometimes I think she gets a little carried away with the details, but her heart is in the right place. She just wants our day to be special." I looked at Ryan's face as he spoke about his mother, and I could see the genuine affection and respect he had for her. He was a good son, and Linda was lucky to have him. But there was something about the way he automatically defended her suggestions that made me wonder if he had been doing it for so long that it had become second nature. "Have you ever disagreed with your mom about anything important?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light and curious rather than accusatory. Ryan laughed. "Are you kidding? We disagreed about everything when I was a teenager. My curfew, my grades, my choice of friends. She had very strong opinions about how things should be done." "What about now? As an adult?" He was quiet for a moment, twirling noodles around his fork. I guess we don't really disagree about much anymore. She's usually right about things, and even when I'm not sure about her suggestions, they tend to work out well in the end. I wondered if Linda was actually always right, or if Ryan had simply learned that it was easier to go along with her opinions than to challenge them. But I didn't voice that thought. Instead, I curled up next to him on the couch and let him tell me about his plans for our honeymoon, trying to push away the nagging feeling that something about his family dynamic wasn't quite as harmonious as it appeared on the surface. The next morning was the rehearsal, and I woke up with butterflies in my stomach that had nothing to do with wedding excitement. I had dreamed about my mother the night before, one of those vivid dreams where she seemed so real that waking up felt like losing her all over again. In the dream, she had been helping me get ready for the wedding, adjusting the lace sleeves of her dress and telling me stories about her own wedding day. My mother had been born in Guadalajara and had immigrated to the United States with her parents when she was 12 years old. She had met my father, a third-generation Mexican-American who worked as a mechanic at a community college in Phoenix, and they had built a life together that honored both their heritage and their American dreams. She had been proud of her culture but also proud of the opportunities that America had given her family. I knew that my mother would have loved Ryan. She would have appreciated his kindness, his work ethic, and the way he made me laugh. But I also knew that she would have had some choice words about anyone who tried to minimize or erase the Mexican traditions that were such an important part of who I was. The rehearsal was held at Desert Ridge Community Center, a beautiful venue with large windows that looked out onto the Sonoran Desert. The space was decorated with warm earth tones and southwestern art, and I had fallen in love with it the moment I saw it. It felt like Arizona, like home, and it seemed like the perfect place to begin our new life together. Linda arrived at the rehearsal wearing a navy blue dress and carrying a large tote bag that appeared to be full of wedding-related items. She greeted everyone warmly, hugging Ryan and Amanda and shaking hands with my father and my Aunt Maria, who had flown in from California to stand in for my mother during the ceremony. The rehearsal itself went smoothly. Our wedding planner, Carol Stevens, walked us through the processional and recessional, made sure everyone knew where to stand and when to move, and answered the dozens small questions that always seem to arise when you're trying to coordinate a group of people who have never performed these particular actions together. After the rehearsal, we all went to dinner at a nearby restaurant that specialized in Southwestern cuisine. I had chosen the venue partly because the food was excellent, and partly because I wanted Linda and David to experience some of the flavors that were important to my family. The restaurant served traditional Mexican dishes alongside more contemporary Southwestern fare, and I hoped it would be a good way to bridge the gap between our two families' culinary traditions. Linda was polite about the food, though I noticed that she ordered one of the milder chicken dishes and asked for the salsa on the side. She spent most of the dinner asking my father and Aunt Maria about their work and their families, and she seemed genuinely interested in their answers. But when the conversation turned to wedding traditions, I felt that familiar tension begin to build. "Emma was telling me about the mariachi band you've arranged," Linda said to my father. "How wonderful that you're including your family's musical traditions." My father smiled proudly. "Music is very important to our family. Emma's mother loved to dance, and we thought the mariachi band would be a beautiful way to honor her memory." "Of course," Linda said. "And I'm sure the guests will enjoy experiencing something new." Ryan and I were just discussing how we might also include some of the Thompson family traditions, perhaps some classical music during the dinner portion of the reception. I felt my Aunt Maria stiffen slightly beside me. She was my mother's younger sister, and she had inherited my mother's ability to read between the lines of what people were saying. I could tell that she was picking up on the same undercurrent that I had been sensing in my conversations with Linda. "That sounds like a nice addition," my father said diplomatically. "Emma and Ryan have done such a beautiful job of planning everything." "They have," Linda agreed. "Though of course, there are always little adjustments that can make things even more special." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I spent the rest of the dinner feeling like I was walking on eggshells. Every time Linda made a suggestion or offered an opinion, I found myself analyzing her words for hidden meanings and wondering if I was being oversensitive or if there really was something more deliberate happening. After dinner, as we were all saying our goodbyes in the restaurant parking lot, Linda pulled me aside for a private moment. "Emma, dear," she said, placing a hand on my arm. "I hope you know how happy David and I are to be welcoming you into our family. Ryan is our only son, and seeing him so happy means the world to us." "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot to me. I do hope you'll consider some of the suggestions I've made about the ceremony and reception. I know change can be difficult, but sometimes small adjustments can make such a big difference in how smoothly everything flows." There was something about the way she said the word change that made it sound like she was talking about something much more significant than wedding music or borrowed jewelry. I felt like she was asking me to change not just the details of the wedding, but fundamental aspects of who I was and where I came from. "I'll definitely think about everything we've discussed," I said carefully. Linda smiled and squeezed my arm. "Wonderful. I'm so looking forward to tomorrow. It's going to be a perfect day." As I drove home that night, I replayed the conversation in my mind, trying to understand what was really happening. Was Linda simply a perfectionist who wanted everything to go smoothly? Or was there something more calculated about her suggestions? And if there was something more going on, what exactly was she trying to achieve? I arrived home to find Ryan already in bed, reading a book about Costa Rican wildlife in preparation for our honeymoon. He looked up when I came into the bedroom, and I could see the happiness and excitement in his face. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Ready for the big day?" I sat down on the edge of the bed and kicked off my shoes. "I think so. A little nervous, but mostly excited." "Me too," he said, setting his book aside and pulling me down next to him. "I can't believe we're actually getting married tomorrow." I curled up against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. In that moment, surrounded by his warmth and love, all of my concerns about Linda seemed distant and unimportant. Tomorrow, I would marry the man I loved, surrounded by our families and friends. Everything else could be worked out later. But as I lay there in the darkness, trying to fall asleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow was going to bring more challenges than I had anticipated. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I found myself thinking about my mother's wedding dress hanging safely in my closet, and wondering if it would make it through the next 24 hours unscathed. I woke up on my wedding morning to the sound of rain pattering against my bedroom window. In Arizona, rain in October was considered good luck, but as I lay there listening to the gentle rhythm, all I could think about was how nothing had gone according to plan over the past few weeks. It started with small things that I initially dismissed as coincidences. The florist called 3 days ago to say that the white roses I had ordered for my bouquet were suddenly unavailable, but they had beautiful red roses that would be much more appropriate for a fall wedding. When I explained that white roses had been my mother's favorite flower and were specifically chosen to honor her memory, the florist seemed confused and mentioned that someone from the Thompson family had called to suggest the color change. Then there was the issue with the reception menu. I had worked with the caterer for months to create a menu that included both traditional American dishes and some of my family's favorite Mexican recipes. My Aunt Maria had even shared her recipe for mole poblano, which the caterer had been excited to feature as one of the signature dishes. But when I called to confirm the final details, I discovered that the Mexican dishes had been replaced with what the caterer described as more universally appealing options. When I asked who had authorized these changes, the caterer hesitated before explaining that Mrs. Thompson had contacted them directly, explaining that she was coordinating with me to make some adjustments that would better accommodate the dietary preferences of the Thompson family guests. She had been so convincing and professional that the caterer had assumed she was speaking on my behalf. Each time I discovered one of these changes, I felt a mixture of frustration and self-doubt. Was I being unreasonable to want Mexican food at my own wedding? Was I making things unnecessarily difficult by insisting on traditions that might make some guests uncomfortable? Linda's alterations were always presented as thoughtful accommodations, ways to make the celebration more inclusive and enjoyable for everyone. But when I tried to discuss these changes with Ryan, he seemed genuinely surprised and assured me that his mother was only trying to help. He offered to talk to her about consulting with me before making any more adjustments, but he also suggested that maybe some compromise would be good for keeping family harmony. His response left me feeling isolated and questioning my own instincts. The morning of the wedding, I tried to push these concerns aside and focus on the joy of the day ahead. Jessica arrived at my apartment at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying her camera equipment and a large cup of coffee for each of us. She had volunteered to help me get ready before switching into her photographer role, and I was grateful to have her calm, organized presence during what I knew would be a hectic morning. "How are you feeling?" she asked, setting up her camera gear in my living room where the lighting was best for getting ready photos. "Like I'm about to marry the love of my life," I said, which was true, even though it wasn't the complete answer to her question. Jessica studied my face for a moment, and I could tell she was picking up on the tension I was trying to hide. "And how are you feeling about everything else?" I told her about the flowers and the menu changes while she helped me with my makeup. As I recounted each incident, I could see Jessica's expression growing more serious. She had photographed dozens of weddings, and she had seen every possible variety of family drama and last-minute crisis. "Emma," she said, pausing in the middle of applying my mascara, "this isn't normal mother-of-the-groom behavior. This is someone systematically undermining your choices and then making you feel guilty for being upset about it." Hearing Jessica put words to what I had been feeling was both validating and terrifying. If she was right, then Linda's behavior wasn't just annoying or controlling, it was deliberately manipulative. And if that was true, then I had been naive to think that marriage would somehow resolve the underlying tension between us. "What should I do?" I asked. "The wedding is in 4 hours. Today, you focus on marrying Ryan," Jessica said firmly. "But after the honeymoon, you and Ryan need to have a serious conversation about boundaries. This pattern is only going to get worse if you don't address it now." We finished my makeup and moved on to my hair, which I was wearing in a simple updo that would showcase the delicate lace details on the back of my mother's dress. As Jessica worked, I found myself thinking about my mother and wishing she were there to give me advice. She had been a strong woman who had navigated her own share of difficult family relationships, and I knew she would have had some wisdom to offer about dealing with Linda's behavior. Around 10:30, there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I could see Linda standing in the hallway, holding what appeared to be a garment bag, and wearing an expression that was difficult to read. Jessica looked at me questioningly, and I shrugged, unsure of what Linda might want but knowing I couldn't avoid her. "Good morning, Emma," Linda said when I opened the door. She was dressed impeccably, as always, in a pale purple dress with matching shoes and a perfectly coordinated handbag. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wanted to stop by before I headed to the venue to get ready." "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "We were just finishing up my hair." Linda's eyes swept over my appearance approvingly, taking in my makeup and the silk robe I was wearing while getting ready. "You look lovely, dear. Very natural and fresh-faced." Something about the way she said natural made it sound like a gentle criticism rather than a compliment, but I thanked her anyway and introduced her to Jessica, who was packing up her makeup supplies. "I brought something for you," Linda said, holding up the garment bag. "I know we talked about you wearing my mother-in-law's pearl necklace, but I thought you might also like to consider this." She unzipped the garment bag to reveal a white silk scarf covered in an intricate pattern of small pearls and crystals. It was beautiful, clearly expensive, and completely wrong for my dress. The scarf was formal and ornate in a way that would compete with the simple elegance of my mother's gown. "It's gorgeous," I said honestly, "but I think it might be a bit much with my dress." "Oh, I don't think so," Linda said, lifting the scarf out of the garment bag and holding it up against my robe. "I think it would add just the right touch of sophistication. After all, this is the Thompson family wedding, and we want everything to reflect the appropriate level of elegance." There it was again, that subtle suggestion that my choices weren't quite refined enough, weren't quite right for a Thompson family event. Jessica caught my eye from across the room, and I could see her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but I think I'd prefer to keep the accessories simple today." Linda's smile faltered for just a moment, and I saw something flash across her face that looked almost like annoyance before the pleasant expression returned. "Of course," she said, folding the scarf back into the garment bag, "though I do hope you'll consider wearing it at the reception. It would photograph beautifully." After Linda left, Jessica and I stood in my living room for a moment, not speaking. Finally, Jessica shook her head and said, "That woman has some serious control issues." "I'm starting to think you're right," I admitted. "But what am I supposed to do about it today?" "Today you get married," Jessica said. "Tomorrow you start setting boundaries." By noon, it was time to head to the venue to finish getting ready. Jessica had left earlier to start photographing the groomsmen and the venue setup, and my Aunt Maria had arrived to help me transport my dress and get into it at the community center. Aunt Maria was my mother's sister, but in many ways, she was more like my mother than anyone else in my life. She had the same direct communication style, the same fierce loyalty to family, and the same ability to see through people's pretenses. "You seem tense, Mija," she said as we loaded my dress carefully into her car. "Pre-wedding nerves?" I told her about Linda's visit that morning and about the various changes that had been made to the wedding plans without my knowledge. As I spoke, I watched Aunt Maria's expression grow increasingly serious. "This woman is testing you," she said finally. "She's seeing how much you'll let her get away with before you stand up for yourself." "But what if I'm wrong?" I asked. "What if she really is just trying to help, and I'm being oversensitive?" Aunt Maria stopped walking and turned to face me. "Emma, your mother raised you to trust your instincts. When someone makes you feel small or wrong for wanting to honor your family's traditions, that's not help. That's control." We arrived at the venue to find the bridal suite in controlled chaos. Amanda, Ryan's sister, was there with her 2 young daughters who were serving as flower girls. The room was filled with dress bags, makeup cases, and flower arrangements, and there was a sense of excitement and anticipation that made my heart lift, despite my concerns about Linda. Amanda had always been kind to me, though we hadn't had many opportunities to spend time together since she lived in Tucson with her husband and daughters. She was 5 years older than Ryan, with the same warm brown eyes and easy smile. Unlike her mother, Amanda seemed genuinely relaxed about wedding details and more interested in making sure everyone was having fun than in ensuring that everything met some predetermined standard of perfection. "Emma," she exclaimed when she saw me, "you're going to look absolutely stunning. I can't wait to see you in your mom's dress." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as everyone got ready. Aunt Maria helped me into my mother's dress, carefully fastening each of the tiny pearl buttons that ran up the back of the bodice. The dress fit perfectly after Mrs. Rodriguez's alterations, and when I looked at myself in the full-length mirror, I could see my mother's face reflected back at me in the curve of my smile and the way the neckline framed my collarbone. "She would be so proud," Aunt Maria whispered, adjusting the chapel-length train so that it fell in elegant folds behind me. I was putting on my earrings when Linda arrived in the bridal suite, already dressed in her mother-of-the-groom outfit. She looked impeccable, as always, but there was something different about her demeanor. She seemed more focused, more determined, like someone who had made a decision and was prepared to act on it. "Oh my," she said when she saw me in my dress. "You look lovely, Emma, though I do think that scarf would add just the perfect finishing touch." Before I could respond, Linda was pulling the pearl and crystal scarf out of her bag and approaching me with it draped over her arms. "Just let me show you how beautiful this would look." "Mrs. Thompson," Aunt Maria said firmly, stepping between Linda and me, "Emma has already decided on her accessories for today." Linda's smile became more fixed, and I could see tension gathering around her eyes. "I'm sure Emma appreciates your input, but as the mother of the groom, I think I have some insight into what would be most appropriate for a Thompson family wedding." The room had gone quiet, and I could feel everyone watching this interaction unfold. Amanda looked uncomfortable, and her daughters sensed the adult tension and moved closer to their mother. I realized that this was a defining moment, not just for my wedding day, but for my entire future relationship with Ryan's family. I appreciate the scarf, I said, keeping my voice steady and polite. But I'm happy with how everything looks right now. Linda's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Of course, dear. Though I hope you'll keep in mind that there will be many photos taken today, and we want everything to look its best for posterity. After Linda left the bridal suite, presumably to check on the groomsmen, Aunt Maria came over and squeezed my hand. You did the right thing, she said quietly. But watch yourself around that woman. She's not finished trying to control this day. Aunt Maria's words turned out to be prophetic. About 30 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Carol Stevens, our wedding planner, knocked on the bridal suite door with a concerned expression on her face. Emma, she said. I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been a small issue with the processional music. Mrs. Thompson has requested a change to something more traditional. I felt my stomach drop. The processional music had been one of the few elements of the ceremony that Linda hadn't tried to modify. Ryan and I had chosen a beautiful acoustic guitar piece that had special meaning for us, since we had first danced to it at a friend's wedding where we had realized we were falling in love. What kind of change? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. She suggested quote, canon in D instead. She says it's more appropriate for a formal ceremony, and she's concerned that guitar music might seem too casual for such an important occasion. I looked around the room at the faces of my bridal party. Jessica had returned from photographing the groomsmen and was listening to this conversation with an expression that suggested she was barely restraining herself from saying something she might regret. Amanda looked embarrassed and apologetic. Aunt Maria looked furious. Where is Ryan? I asked. He's with the groomsmen in the other building, Carol said. Mrs. Thompson said she would handle communicating the change to you since she didn't want to bother him with details so close to the ceremony. Of course she had. Linda had deliberately waited until Ryan was unavailable, and I was in the vulnerable position of being dressed and ready, with guests arriving and the ceremony about to begin. She had calculated this timing perfectly, knowing that I would be unlikely to make a scene or cause delays when everyone was depending on the wedding to proceed smoothly. I need to talk to Ryan, I said. Emma, Amanda said quietly. I'm really sorry about this. Mom gets very focused on details when she's nervous, and sometimes she doesn't realize how her suggestions might sound to other people. I appreciated Amanda's attempt to smooth things over, but I was beginning to understand that Linda's behavior wasn't about nervousness or perfectionism. It was about control, and it was about establishing from the very beginning of my marriage that she would be the one making decisions about how the Thompson family operated. Carol was looking increasingly uncomfortable as she waited for my response about the music. I could see her mentally calculating how long it would take to communicate a change to Codamel, the musicians, and whether there was still time to make adjustments without delaying the ceremony. Please tell the musicians that we're keeping the original processional music, I said firmly. If Mrs. Thompson has concerns about it, she can discuss them with Ryan after the ceremony. Carol nodded and hurried out to communicate this decision to the venue staff. As soon as she was gone, Jessica came over to me and lowered her voice. Emma, I need to tell you something. When I was photographing the groomsmen earlier, I overheard Mrs. Thompson talking to someone on the phone about the wedding. She was complaining about how difficult it was to work with people who didn't understand proper protocol for formal events. I felt a chill run through me. What exactly did she say? She said that some people need more guidance than others when it comes to understanding what's appropriate, and that she was doing her best to help educate you about Thompson family standards. The word educate hit me like a slap. Linda wasn't trying to be helpful or inclusive. She was trying to train me, to teach me my place in the family hierarchy, and to establish that my preferences and traditions were subordinate to hers. Before I could respond to Jessica's revelation, there was another knock on the door. This time it was David Thompson, Ryan's father, looking handsome in his black tuxedo, but somewhat uncomfortable with whatever message he had been sent to deliver. Emma, he said, you look absolutely beautiful. Ryan is a lucky man. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. David cleared his throat and shifted slightly, the way people do when they're about to say something they don't entirely agree with. Linda asked me to check with you about the reception timeline. She's concerned that the mariachi band might go on for too long and thinks it might be better to limit their performance to just one set. And there it was. The final assault on the elements of the wedding that reflected my heritage and my family's traditions. Linda had systematically targeted the Mexican food, the white roses that honored my mother, and now the mariachi band that my father had specifically requested to celebrate our culture and our joy. I looked at David's face and could see that he was uncomfortable with this conversation. Unlike his wife, he didn't seem to have any strong opinions about wedding protocols or family hierarchies. He was simply a man who had been married to Linda for over 30 years and had learned that it was easier to deliver her messages than to argue with her about them. "Mr. Thompson," I said carefully, "I appreciate Mrs. Thompson's concern about the timeline, but Ryan and I have already discussed the music arrangements with the band, and we're happy with what we've planned." David nodded quickly, looking relieved that I hadn't asked him to take a position on the issue. Of course. I'm sure everything will work out beautifully." After David left, I sat down heavily in one of the chairs and tried to process what was happening. In the space of a few hours, Linda had attempted to control my accessories, my music, my reception timeline, and had been overheard describing her efforts to educate me about family standards. This wasn't wedding day stress or perfectionism. This was a calculated campaign to establish dominance. Aunt Maria came over and knelt beside my chair. "Misha, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if I don't stand up to this now, it's going to get worse after the wedding," I said. "But I'm also thinking that I don't want to ruin Ryan's wedding day by starting a family war." "Sometimes," Aunt Maria said quietly, "protecting yourself is more important than protecting other people's comfort." 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I asked Carol Stevens to give me 5 minutes alone with Ryan before we walked down the aisle. It wasn't traditional, and I knew it would probably cause some raised eyebrows. But I needed to talk to my future husband about what was happening before we made our vows to each other. Carol arranged for me to meet Ryan in a small office adjacent to the main ceremony space. When he saw me in my wedding dress, his face lit up with such pure joy and love that I almost lost my resolve to have this conversation. "You look incredible," he said, reaching out to take my hands. "I can't believe we're actually doing this." "Ryan," I said, "we need to talk about your mother." His expression shifted slightly, and I could see him bracing himself for whatever I was about to say. "What's wrong?" I told him about the morning's events, about the scarf and the music and the timeline concerns. I told him about the overheard phone conversation and about the pattern of changes that had been made to our wedding plans without my knowledge. As I spoke, I watched his face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. "I'm sure she doesn't mean anything by it," he said finally. "She's just trying to help make everything perfect." "Ryan," I said, "in the past 3 hours, your mother has tried to change my accessories, my processional music, and my reception timeline. She's been overheard talking about educating me about family standards. At what point does this stop being helpful and start being controlling?" Ryan was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the conflict between his loyalty to his mother and his commitment to me. Finally, he sighed and said, "I'll talk to her after the honeymoon. I'll make sure she understands that she needs to respect your decisions." It wasn't the immediate, unequivocal support I had hoped for, but it was a start. And more importantly, it was an acknowledgement that there was a problem that needed to be addressed. "Thank you," I said. That's all I needed to hear. The ceremony itself was beautiful, despite all of the morning's drama. The rain had stopped, and the late afternoon light streaming through the windows of the community center created a warm, golden atmosphere that felt magical and intimate. Our families and friends filled the space with love and laughter, and when Ryan and I exchanged vows, I felt like we were creating something solid and lasting together. The processional music played exactly as we had planned, and I walked down the aisle to the acoustic guitar piece that held so much meaning for us. I could see Linda sitting in the front row, her expression politely pleasant but not entirely happy. She applauded at the appropriate moments and smiled for the photographer, but there was something rigid about her posture that suggested she was still unhappy about the morning's conversations. The reception began exactly as scheduled, with the mariachi band playing traditional Mexican wedding songs while our guests enjoyed cocktails and appetizers. I could see my father beaming with pride as the musicians filled the room with the sounds of his childhood, and I felt grateful that we had managed to preserve this element of the celebration despite Linda's concerns. But even as I enjoyed the music and the company of our guests, I found myself watching Linda out of the corner of my eye. She was mingling politely and making conversation with my family members, but there was something about her demeanor that made me think this conflict was far from over. She had the air of someone who had lost a battle but had not yet conceded the war. During the dinner service, I noticed that Linda spent a considerable amount of time talking to various guests, particularly the older women from the Thompson family side. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see her gesturing toward the mariachi band and toward me, and I had the uncomfortable feeling that she was providing commentary about the wedding choices that didn't align with her preferences. When Jessica came over during a break in her photography duties, I mentioned what I had observed. "I've been watching her too," Jessica said quietly. "She's definitely working the room, and not in a good way. But Emma, today is your day. Don't let her steal your joy." Jessica was right, and I spent the rest of the reception focusing on celebrating with Ryan and our families. We danced to the mariachi music, we laughed with our friends, and we created memories that I knew I would treasure for the rest of my life. But even in the midst of all that joy, I couldn't shake the feeling that Linda's behavior was a preview of challenges to come. 3 weeks into our honeymoon in Costa Rica, I received a phone call that changed everything. Ryan and I were staying at a small eco-lodge in the mountains near Monteverde, and the cell phone reception was spotty at best. When my phone finally connected to a signal strong enough for calls, I discovered 7 missed messages from Jessica, each one marked as urgent. I stepped out onto our cabin's private balcony, where the morning mist was still clinging to the cloud forest canopy, and called Jessica back. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Emma, thank God you called back. I have something to tell you, and you're not going to believe it." "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately thinking of my father or Aunt Maria. "Is everyone okay?" "Everyone's fine," Jessica said quickly. "But Emma, I found something out about Linda, and you need to know about it before you come home." I sank into one of the wooden chairs on the balcony, watching a family of howler monkeys move through the trees in the distance. "What kind of something?" Jessica took a deep breath. "You know how I've been editing your wedding photos? Well, I've been going through all the shots from the reception, and there's this one photo where Linda is talking to your cousin Patricia. Linda's holding her purse in a weird way, and I could see some papers sticking out of it." "Okay," I said, not sure where this was going. One of the papers had a letterhead that I recognized. It was from Sunrise Manor, that assisted living facility on the north side of Phoenix. My grandmother lived there before she passed away, so I knew the logo. I couldn't figure out why Linda would have paperwork from there, so I did some digging. Jessica paused, and I could hear her moving around, probably pacing the way she always did when she was agitated. "Emma, Linda's first husband didn't die when Ryan was in college. He's been living at Sunrise Manor for the past 8 years. He has early-onset Alzheimer's, and Linda has been paying for his care this entire time." I felt like the world had tilted sideways. "That's impossible. David is Ryan's father. They've been married for over 30 years. "David is Ryan's stepfather," Jessica said. "Linda was married before, to a man named Robert Chen. Robert is Ryan and Amanda's biological father. Linda married David when the kids were young, and David adopted them. But she never divorced Robert because he was already showing signs of cognitive decline, and divorcing him would have meant losing his military benefits, which pay for his care." I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my chair. Through the sliding glass door, I could see Ryan in our cabin, reading a book about Costa Rican birds. He had no idea that his entire understanding of his family history was about to be turned upside down. "Jessica, are you absolutely sure about this?" "I spent 2 days confirming everything. I have a friend who works in medical records, and she helped me verify the information." "Emma, Linda has been living a double life for decades. David doesn't know about Robert, and neither do Ryan or Amanda. She's been managing Robert's care and paying his expenses, while maintaining the fiction that David is the kid's biological father." I sat back down heavily, trying to process this revelation. "Why are you telling me this? What does this have to do with me?" "Because," Jessica said, "I think Linda has been so desperate to control your wedding and your marriage. because she's terrified that any disruption to the family's established narrative might expose her secret. She can't afford to have anyone digging too deeply into family history or asking too many questions about the past. The implications of what Jessica was telling me began to sink in. Linda's obsessive need to control every detail of the wedding, her insistence on Thompson family traditions, her apparent anxiety about maintaining proper appearances. All of it suddenly made sense if she was protecting a secret that could destroy her carefully constructed life. "There's more," Jessica continued. "I found out that Robert and Linda were married in a traditional Chinese ceremony in 1985. Robert's family emigrated from Taiwan in the 1970s, and Linda learned Mandarin to communicate with his parents. There are photos from their wedding in the Manor's memory care files, photos that the staff uses to help Robert remember his past. I thought about Linda's reaction to the Mexican elements of our wedding, her insistence on what she called appropriate traditions, her apparent discomfort with anything that didn't fit her vision of a proper American family celebration. The irony was staggering. Emma, I think you need to see these photos. Linda's wedding dress from her first marriage, it's gorgeous. It's this incredible red silk chapao with gold embroidery, completely traditional. She looks so young and happy in the pictures, nothing like the woman we know now." I closed my eyes, feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of what Jessica was revealing. "Where are these photos?" "That's the thing. I made copies, but Emma, I think Linda knows that someone has been asking questions. My friend at the medical facility said that Linda came in yesterday asking about who had been accessing Robert's files. She seemed really agitated. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cool mountain air. If Linda suspected that her secret was in danger of being exposed, there was no telling what she might do to protect herself. "Jessica, I need you to be careful. If Linda thinks you know something, she might try to do something to stop you from talking." "I'm already being careful," Jessica said. "But Emma, you need to know that she's not the person she's pretended to be. And if she's been lying about something this fundamental for 30 years, what else might she be hiding?" After I hung up with Jessica, I sat on the balcony for a long time, watching the clouds move through the trees and trying to figure out how to process this information. Everything I thought I knew about Ryan's family had been turned upside down. His father wasn't his father, his mother had been living a double life, and the woman who had spent our wedding day trying to erase my cultural identity had herself hidden her own multicultural past. When I finally went back inside the cabin, Ryan looked up from his book with a smile that quickly faded when he saw my expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting the book aside and coming over to me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I took his hands and led him over to the small couch by the window. "Ryan, I need to tell you something that Jessica just told me about your family. It's going to be shocking, and I need you to let me explain everything before you react." Ryan's face went pale, and I could see him bracing himself for bad news. "Is someone hurt? Is Mom okay?" "Your mom is fine," I said. "But Ryan, she's been keeping a secret from your family for a very long time." I told him everything that Jessica had discovered, watching his face change from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like grief. When I finished, he sat in silence for several minutes, staring out the window at the cloud forest. "David isn't my father," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "David is your father in every way that matters," I said. "He raised you, he loves you, he's been there for you your entire life. But biologically, no, he's not your father." Ryan stood up and walked to the window, pressing his palms against the glass. "This explains so much," he said. "I always wondered why I didn't look like David, why Amanda and I both have these dark eyes when David's are blue. Mom always said we took after her side of the family, but now—" "There's more," I said gently. "Jessica found photos from your mother's first wedding. Ryan, she was married in a traditional Chinese ceremony. She spoke Mandarin. Her first marriage was completely different from everything she's insisted on for our family." Ryan turned around to face me, and I could see tears in his eyes. "She made you feel guilty for wanting to include Mexican traditions in our wedding, and the whole time she was hiding the fact that she had honored Chinese traditions in her own first wedding?" I nodded, feeling my own anger rising again at the memory of Linda's behavior during our wedding planning. "It's worse than hypocritical, Ryan. It's cruel. We spent the rest of our honeymoon talking through the implications of this discovery. Ryan was devastated by the realization that his entire understanding of his family history had been based on lies, but he was also angry about the way Linda had treated me, now that he understood the full context of her behavior. She was projecting, he said one evening as we sat on the beach watching the sunset over the Pacific. She was so terrified of anyone discovering her secret that she tried to control everything about our wedding to make sure it fit her narrative of what a proper American family looks like. The question is, I said, what do we do about it when we get home? Ryan was quiet for a long time, listening to the waves crash against the shore. I think we need to confront her, he said finally, not to hurt her or expose her secret to David, but to make her understand that her behavior toward you was unacceptable and that it can't continue. When we returned to Phoenix, we found my apartment exactly as we had left it, except for one significant difference. My wedding dress, which I had carefully hung in the bedroom closet before leaving for our honeymoon, was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had forgotten where I had put it, or that perhaps Jessica had moved it while checking on the apartment during our absence. But when I called Jessica, she insisted that she hadn't touched anything in the bedroom, and that the dress had definitely been hanging in the closet when she had stopped by the previous week to water my plants. Emma, Jessica said, her voice tight with concern, I think you need to check if anything else is missing. I went through the apartment systematically, but nothing else appeared to have been disturbed. The jewelry was all in place, the electronics were untouched, and there were no signs of forced entry. Whoever had taken the dress had either had a key or had been very skilled at getting into the apartment without leaving evidence. Who else has a key to your place? Jessica asked when I called her back. Just you and Ryan, I said. Then I stopped, remembering something. Wait. Linda asked to borrow my key last month when I was at work, and the florist needed to deliver some samples. She said she would coordinate with them and then return the key to Ryan. Did Ryan give you the key back? I thought about it, trying to remember. With all the wedding preparations and the honeymoon planning, I wasn't sure if I had ever gotten the key back. I called Ryan, who was at his apartment picking up mail and dealing with some work issues. Did your mom ever give you my spare key back? I asked. There was a pause. What spare key? I explained about lending the key to Linda for the florist delivery, and I could hear Ryan's sharp intake of breath. Emma, I never gave her permission to borrow your key, and she definitely never returned anything to me. We hung up, and I sat in my empty apartment, trying to figure out what to do next. If Linda had taken my wedding dress, why would she do such a thing? What could she possibly gain from stealing a dress that held such deep, sentimental value for me? The answer came to me suddenly, and it was so simple and so cruel that it took my breath away. Linda had taken the dress because she knew it was the one thing that would hurt me most to lose. It was my connection to my mother, my link to my family's history, and the symbol of everything she had tried to control about our wedding. By taking it, she was sending a message that she still had the power to hurt me, even after I had stood up to her. But if Linda thought that stealing my dress would make me back down or be afraid of her, she had seriously underestimated who she was dealing with. Instead of feeling defeated, I felt a cold, focused anger that clarified everything I needed to do next. I called Jessica and asked her to meet me at my apartment with the copies of the photos she had found at Sunrise Manor. Then I called Ryan and asked him to come over as well. It was time to end this game that Linda had been playing. When Jessica arrived, she brought not just the photos, but also a thick folder of documents she had assembled during her investigation. There were marriage certificates, military service records, medical facility admission forms, and insurance documents that painted a complete picture of Linda's deception. I kept digging after we talked, Jessica explained. I wanted to make sure I had all the facts before you confronted her. The photos from Linda's first wedding were stunning. She looked radiant in the red silk qipao, her hair elaborately styled with traditional Chinese ornaments, standing next to a handsome young man in military dress uniform. They were surrounded by both families, and everyone in the photos looked genuinely happy and celebratory. She looks so different, Ryan said when he arrived and saw the photos. Not just younger, but like a completely different person. She was a different person, I said. This is who she was before she decided to reinvent herself. Ryan picked up one of the photos and studied it carefully. That's definitely Mom, but I've never seen her look this happy. Even at our wedding, she looked more concerned about appearances than joyful. Jessica spread out the other documents on my dining table. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an insurance form. "Linda has been Robert's primary caregiver and decision-maker for his medical care for 8 years. She's been managing his finances, coordinating his treatment, visiting him regularly. She's been essentially living 2 completely separate lives, which explains why she's so obsessed with controlling appearances and maintaining the fiction of the perfect traditional American family," I said. "She can't afford for anyone to start asking questions about the past or looking too closely at family history." Ryan sat down heavily in one of my dining chairs. "Do you think David knows any of this?" "I doubt it," Jessica said. "I did some research on David too, and everything about his life suggests that he believes he's Ryan's biological father and that he's been married to Linda since the early 1980s. He probably thinks Robert never existed." I looked at the photos again, focusing on Linda's face. The woman in these pictures looked genuinely happy, in love, proud of her heritage and her husband's heritage. It was heartbreaking to think about what had happened to turn that joyful young woman into someone who would steal a wedding dress out of spite. "We need to get my dress back," I said, "and we need to make sure Linda understands that this kind of behavior is never going to be acceptable again." "How do we do that without destroying David and exposing her secret?" Ryan asked. It was a good question. As angry as I was with Linda, I didn't want to hurt David, who was an innocent victim in this situation. And despite everything Linda had done, I could understand why she had made the choices she had. Caring for a spouse with Alzheimer's while trying to build a new life with someone else was an impossible situation with no good solutions. "We confront her privately," I said. "We let her know that we know the truth, and we give her a chance to return the dress and change her behavior before we consider any other options." Jessica looked skeptical. "Emma, this woman has been successfully maintaining a double life for decades. She's not going to give up control easily." "Maybe not," I said. "But she's also been living in fear of exposure for 30 years. Sometimes the relief of finally being honest is stronger than the fear of consequences." We decided to arrange a meeting with Linda at a neutral location where we could talk privately without the risk of David overhearing anything. Ryan called his mother and asked her to meet us at a small cafe near the university, telling her that we wanted to talk about some family matters related to our marriage. Linda arrived at the cafe looking impeccable as always, dressed in a cream-colored suit with her hair perfectly styled. She greeted us warmly, though I noticed that she avoided making direct eye contact with me. "This is lovely," she said, settling into the booth across from Ryan and me. "I've been hoping we could have a nice family discussion about how to move forward together." Jessica had positioned herself at a table across the cafe, where she could observe our conversation but not be directly involved. We had agreed that having her present might make Linda feel ambushed, but we wanted her nearby in case we needed her support. "Mom," Ryan said, his voice carefully controlled, "we need to talk to you about some things that have come to light while we were on our honeymoon." Linda's smile faltered slightly. "What kind of things?" I reached into my purse and pulled out one of the photos from Linda's first wedding, sliding it across the table toward her. Her face went completely white, and for a moment I thought she might faint. "We know about Robert," I said quietly. "We know about your first marriage, about Sunrise Manor, about everything." Linda stared at the photo for a long time, her hands trembling slightly. When she finally looked up, her carefully maintained composure had cracked, and I could see the exhaustion and fear that she had been carrying for decades. "How did you find out?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "That's not important," Ryan said. "What's important is that we understand now why you've been so controlling about family appearances and traditions. But Mom, the way you treated Emma during our wedding planning was wrong, and it needs to stop." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Robert's family never accepted David, and David's family never knew about Robert. I've been walking a tightrope for 30 years, trying to keep everyone happy and keep the peace. I understand that it's been difficult," I said. "But taking your fear and stress out on me isn't acceptable. And stealing my wedding dress is absolutely unforgivable." Linda looked startled. "I didn't steal anything." "My dress is missing from my apartment," I said. "You're the only person other than Ryan and Jessica who had access to my key. Where is it?" Linda was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her calculating her options. Finally, she sighed and reached into her purse, pulling out my spare key and placing it on the table. "It's in my closet at home," she said. "I wasn't going to keep it. I needed time to think." "Time to think about what?" Ryan asked. "About whether I could fix this," Linda said. "About whether there was a way to make things right without losing everything I've built." I felt some of my anger dissipate as I looked at Linda's face. She looked older than I had ever seen her, worn down by years of maintaining an impossible deception. But that didn't excuse her behavior, or give her the right to hurt me. "You can start making things right by returning my dress today," I said, "and by promising that you'll never again try to control or manipulate me or my marriage to Ryan." Linda nodded slowly. "I'll get your dress. And I promise I won't interfere again. But please, you have to understand that David can never know about Robert. It would destroy him." "We're not going to tell David," Ryan said. "But Mom, you need to think seriously about whether living this double life is sustainable long-term. Secrets this big have a way of coming out eventually." As we left the cafe, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that we had confronted Linda and that I would get my mother's dress back, but sadness for the woman who had spent 3 decades living in fear of her own truth. I still didn't forgive her for the way she had treated me, but I was beginning to understand the desperation that had driven her behavior. That evening, Linda arrived at my apartment, carrying a garment bag. She handed it to me without saying much, but when I unzipped it and saw my mother's dress hanging inside, undamaged and carefully preserved, I felt a weight lift from my chest that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. "Emma," Linda said as she prepared to leave, "I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. I was just so afraid that anything different or unexpected might raise questions that I couldn't answer." "I understand that you were afraid," I said. "But fear doesn't excuse cruelty. And hiding who you really are doesn't protect anyone, it just hurts everyone involved." Linda nodded and turned to go, but then she stopped and looked back at me. "That dress you wore to the wedding," she said. "Your mother's dress. It was beautiful. It suited you perfectly." It was the first genuine compliment Linda had ever given me about anything related to my family or my heritage, and despite everything that had happened, it meant something to hear her say it. After Linda left, Ryan and I sat on my couch looking at the photos from her first wedding. There was something both tragic and hopeful about seeing evidence of who Linda had been before fear and secrecy had changed her into someone else. "Do you think she'll be able to change?" Ryan asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But for the first time since I've known her, I think she's been forced to confront the cost of all the lies she's been telling." Ryan picked up the photo of Linda in her red wedding dress and studied it carefully. "I wish I had known this version of my mother," he said. "She looks so alive in this picture." "Maybe," I said, "now that the secret is out, at least with us, she'll be able to find her way back to some of that joy." It was an optimistic thought, but as I hung my mother's dress back in my closet that night, I realized that the real victory wasn't in getting my dress back or in exposing Linda's secrets. The real victory was in refusing to be intimidated or controlled, and in establishing from the very beginning of my marriage that I wouldn't be anyone other than exactly who I was. I woke up the morning after retrieving my wedding dress with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Something fundamental had shifted during our confrontation with Linda, and I realized that simply getting my dress back wasn't enough. For too long I had been reacting to Linda's manipulations instead of taking control of the situation myself. That was about to change. The idea came to me while I was drinking my morning coffee and looking at the photos Jessica had given me from Linda's first wedding. The image of Linda in her beautiful red qipao, surrounded by Chinese traditions and looking genuinely happy, kept drawing my eye. There was something powerful about seeing evidence of who she had been before fear had transformed her into someone else. That's when I realized what I needed to do. I called Jessica and asked her to meet me for lunch, telling her I had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. When she arrived at the small Mexican restaurant where we had agreed to meet, I was already sitting at a corner table with a notebook full of plans spread out in front of me. "Okay," Jessica said, sliding into the booth across from me. "You have that look on your face that usually means you're about to do something that will either change your life or get you into serious trouble." "Maybe both," I said, showing her the notebook. "Jessica, I've been thinking about Linda's situation, and I think I understand something that she doesn't understand about herself." Jessica looked skeptical. Which is what? She's been so focused on hiding her past that she's forgotten who she really is. She's spent 30 years pretending to be someone else, and I think deep down, she's miserable. But more than that, I think she's trapped herself in a life that doesn't actually make her happy. Okay, Jessica said slowly, so what are you planning to do about it? I took a deep breath. I'm going to throw Linda a surprise party celebrating her first wedding anniversary. Jessica stared at me for a moment, then started laughing. Emma, that is either the most brilliant or the most vindictive thing I've ever heard you suggest. I can't figure out which. It's not vindictive, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Think about it. Linda has been living in fear of exposure for 30 years. She's been so afraid of people finding out about Robert and her first marriage that she's completely cut herself off from that part of her identity. But what if instead of hiding it, we celebrated it? Jessica's expression grew more serious as she considered what I was saying. Emma, that could backfire spectacularly. What if Linda sees this as an attack? What if she thinks you're trying to humiliate her or expose her secret to David? That's why it has to be done carefully, I said. We invite only people who already know about Robert, or people who Linda chooses to tell. We make it clear that this is about honoring a part of her life that she's been forced to hide, not about exposing her or causing her pain. Jessica was quiet for a moment, studying my notebook. Who exactly would you invite to this party? Robert, if his condition allows it. Some of his family members who might still be in touch with Linda. Maybe some old friends from when she was married to him. People who knew and loved the woman she was before she felt like she had to hide. And the point would be what, exactly? I closed my notebook and leaned forward. The point would be to show Linda that she doesn't have to choose between her past and her present. That she can honor Robert and their marriage while still loving David and the life they've built together. That keeping secrets isn't the only way to protect the people she cares about. Jessica picked up her menu and started reading it, which was always what she did when she was thinking through a complicated problem. Finally, she looked up at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Emma, this is either going to heal something that's been broken in Linda for decades, or it's going to destroy your relationship with Ryan's family permanently. Are you prepared for either outcome? I thought about that question seriously. Was I prepared for the possibility that Linda would see this gesture as an attack and retaliate even more severely? Was I prepared for the possibility that David might find out about Robert and feel betrayed? Was I prepared for the possibility that this plan might backfire and cause pain for everyone involved? I'm prepared for the possibility that things might get worse before they get better, I said finally. But Jessica, I can't keep living in a family where someone's fear controls everyone else's choices. Linda's secret has been poisoning every interaction we have. It's the reason she treated me so badly during the wedding planning, and it's going to keep being a problem until it's addressed. So you're going to force her to address it by throwing her a party celebrating the thing she's most afraid of people finding out about? I'm going to give her an opportunity to stop being afraid, I corrected. There's a difference. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into planning what I privately thought of as the most important event of my life. I started by researching Linda's first wedding and the early years of her marriage to Robert. Jessica helped me track down some of Robert's family members, including his sister Margaret, who still lived in Phoenix and had been quietly staying in touch with Linda over the years. Margaret was surprised to hear from me, but when I explained what I was planning, she became emotional over the phone. Linda has been carrying this burden alone for so long, Margaret said. She visits Robert every week, you know. She brings him photos from their early years together and reads to him from books they used to enjoy. But she's never been able to share her grief or her memories with anyone because she's so afraid of hurting David. Do you think Robert would be able to attend a small gathering? I asked. Some days are better than others, Margaret said. But I think he would enjoy seeing old photos and hearing familiar voices. And Linda would be so surprised to know that people still remember and care about that part of her life. I also reached out to some of Linda's former colleagues from her teaching days, people who had known her when she was first married to Robert. Many of them remembered her fondly and were shocked to learn that she had been struggling with this situation for so long. Linda was always so vibrant in those days, said her former teaching partner Carol Martinez. She used to bring Chinese pastries to faculty meetings and talk about the language classes she was taking. She was so proud of learning about Robert's culture. I always wondered what happened to that side of her personality. The most challenging part of the planning was figuring out how to approach Linda about the party without spoiling the surprise or giving her an opportunity to shut it down. I decided to enlist Ryan's help, though I was careful not to tell him too many details about what I was planning. "I want to do something nice for your mother," I told him one evening while we were making dinner together in my kitchen. "Something that shows her I understand that she's been under a lot of pressure and that I want to support her." Ryan looked pleased but surprised. "That's really generous of you, especially after everything that's happened. I think your mother and I got off on the wrong foot because we were both protecting things that felt important to us," I said. "But maybe there's a way for us to understand each other better." Ryan agreed to help me arrange a time when Linda would be available for what I told him was a small family gathering. We decided on a Saturday afternoon at my apartment, which would allow me to control the environment and ensure that David wouldn't accidentally walk in on something he wasn't prepared to see. The morning of the party, I woke up with a mixture of excitement and terror. I had spent weeks planning every detail, but I still wasn't sure how Linda would react when she realized what was happening. Jessica arrived early to help me set up, bringing flowers and Chinese tea and a selection of foods that we thought Robert might remember and enjoy. "Are you nervous?" Jessica asked as we arranged photos from Linda's first wedding around my living room. "Terrified," I admitted, "but I think that means I'm doing something important." Margaret arrived with Robert around noon. I had been worried about how he would handle being in an unfamiliar environment, but he seemed calm and alert. He was a small, dignified man with kind eyes, and when he saw the photos of his wedding to Linda, he smiled and said her name clearly. "Linda," he said, picking up one of the photos and studying it carefully. "My beautiful Linda." Margaret squeezed my hand. "He's having a good day," she whispered. "He definitely remembers her." The other guests began arriving around 1 o'clock. There were 6 people in total, not including Jessica and me: Robert and Margaret, Carol Martinez and another former teaching colleague, and 2 of Robert's cousins who had driven down from Flagstaff for the occasion. Everyone seemed genuinely excited to be there and curious about how Linda would react. At 1:30, Ryan arrived with Linda, who was clearly puzzled about why I had invited her to my apartment for what Ryan had described as a small family gathering. She was dressed nicely, as always, in a navy blue dress with matching shoes, but I could see the wariness in her eyes as she climbed the stairs to my front door. When I opened the door and Linda saw Robert sitting on my couch, she stopped walking and put her hand over her mouth. For a moment, I was afraid she might turn around and leave, but then Robert looked up and saw her. "Linda," he said again, his face lighting up with recognition. "You came." Linda walked slowly into my living room, staring at Robert as if she couldn't believe he was really there. She looked around at the other guests, at the photos from their wedding displayed on my mantelpiece, at the Chinese tea service I had set up on the coffee table. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "What is this?" "This is a celebration," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "A celebration of a marriage that deserves to be remembered and honored." Linda sank into the chair across from Robert, tears streaming down her face. "How did you know to do this?" "Because I realized that you've been carrying this alone for too long," I said. "And because I think you've forgotten that loving Robert doesn't mean betraying David, and honoring your first marriage doesn't mean destroying your second one." For the next 2 hours, Linda's old friends and Robert's family shared memories of the early years of their marriage. They talked about Linda's enthusiasm for learning Mandarin, about the beautiful dinner party she used to host where she would serve both American and Chinese dishes, about the way she and Robert used to laugh together over cultural misunderstandings and language mix-ups. Linda listened to these stories with an expression of wonder, as if she were hearing about someone else's life. Occasionally, she would add her own memories, tentatively at first, but with growing confidence as she realized that everyone in the room loved and supported both her and Robert. "I had forgotten how happy we were," she said at